Hey everyone, welcome to our special March Madness preview edition of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
Joe, March Madness, let's go into Mississippi Madness, and that's the claims over the Chris Beard firing. Hiring. There's people all over the place. There's opinions like mine that is, hey, there hasn't been anything proven, and you'll never be able to be a coach like this ever. Like he's such an incredible hire too. How could you possibly hire that guy? And Joe, like I said, in my mind, you have zero convictions. You have a recanting of whatever the allegation of what the allegations are. There's nothing that's came of it, and this is by leaps and bounds the best person available on the market, and easily the most impactful hire in the history of Ole Miss basketball.
No, it really is, Dan. And I was watching clips of yesterday's press conference. And, the more I think about it, I feel like it's just such a slam dunk, from a basketball standpoint from Ole Miss for all the points that you made. And I really think there's a decent chance that over the next few years, you're going to have some people in the fan base that are more interested, more locked into basketball than any other sport, because I think the team could be potentially that good. And I never thought, that would be the case the last few years, the way the program has been. There's been a lot of apathy. The crowds have been dismal. And Chris Beard was very vocal last night saying that he doesn't just want to make the NCAA tournament. He's like, I want to win the NCAA tournament, which is crazy to sound, to say at Ole Miss. But when you think about a guy that was the 2019 Coach of the Year nationally and almost won a national title at Texas Tech, it's not that far-fetched.
Well, Joe, not only that, when he got fired from Texas, over the allegations that he had from his fiance, they were number one in the country when he got fired. And this team, after him getting fired, was able to maintain such a high level of play. They come in as, I believe, the number one overall 2 seed, coming off beating Kansas in the final of the Big 12 tournament. So they won what many people believe to be the best tournament in college basketball. They won that league without him, and that's the nucleus of players that he's built. So, you can imagine that if he had been there the whole season, they probably would be maybe the number one overall seed in this tournament.
No, that's a compelling point. He assembled that team of talent, and there's rumor that at least one player from Texas, I think a former 5-star recruit that's a freshman, might even join in Oxford from the transfer portal. And so it's going to be fascinating to see the class and the group of players that he brings to Oxford. I think he'll probably keep a couple of the players from the current roster, most notably Matthew Morrell. If he can convince him to stay, I think that'd be a great piece. But I really think that in the next 2 years, you're going to see, if not next year, Ole Miss right there in the NCAA tournament conversation. I don't know if I'll go as far to say that Chris Beard will get Ole Miss eventually to a Final Four, because I don't know how many years he'll be there ultimately if he wins. But I definitely think that second weekend, Sweet 16 in the next few years is definitely a possibility.
Joe, I 100% think that's on the table. And you're talking about him possibly being the most popular coach on campus and having some fans that have Ole Miss basketball be the most popular sport. Just look at what Bruce Pearl did at Auburn. He comes into a school that's football crazy, that's always been the number one sport, had a relatively poor history in basketball. Before Bruce Pearl had gotten there, Auburn had been to, I think, three Sweet 16s and one Elite Eight. And he comes in and, similar to Ole Miss, they built a nice facility. They built it my senior year. I was at Auburn. And it wasn't until 4 years later when they bring in Bruce Pearl. And he took a couple, years of growing pains. But then he gets them to the NCAA tournament in 2018. And the next year they go to the Final Four. And then after that, he makes it to where, I think right now basketball is, if it's not as popular as football, it's a notch, like a very small notch below it. And in terms of filling out the stadium and the ticket prices and everything, it's succeeding basketball. And he's the highest paid coach at the university. And he's definitely the most beloved figure at the university when it comes to athletics. And Chris Beard has that possibility because right now, outside of course, what Mike Bianco has done, he's a more accomplished basketball coach than Lane Kiffin is as a football coach.
Yeah, there's something about him. I was listening to him talk last night. I think that, with everything he's been through, he seems to be the type of guy that's very generous with his time, like really just happy that anybody gave him an opportunity, like
Mhm.
really appreciative of where he is. And I think that, when people kind of get over, just kind of the, polarizing extent of a hire like this, and, just think about as he settles in, hopefully, I think that there are going to be a lot of people that embrace him like as a person. They're like, this is a nice guy to talk to. I think he's going to get the student body really energized. He also does a lot of, I think he has like a TV show or something he does, the Fireside Chats, where he'll bring guests in and talk about basketball. And I think that he's going to have the fan base excited. And then because of who he is, he's just going to bring so much more relevancy to the program. You're going to have people, in the state of Oregon that know about Ole Miss basketball now.
Absolutely. And here's something else to think about too. You say he may not be there that long. Well, I don't think a lot of people thought that, Bruce Pearl would stay at Auburn for a long time. And because of the success he had and the support that he got that just, took off, they were able to lock him into a forever deal because he fell in love with the place that gave him that chance. When he was untouchable, they took him in and they let him be himself and persevere through it. And Ole Miss is doing that now for Chris Beard. So if he has some success, I think they'll have a great chance at holding on to him if they can make the right offer.
Yeah, no, I could see that being the case. And I could see, like you said, him being grateful, for the opportunity. I definitely feel like he's there about 4 years regardless. And it just kind of depends on, like how it goes. From like the glass half empty mindset to look at it objectively, obviously there's a lot of good coaches in the SEC, so nothing's guaranteed. Like it will be tough, year in and year out, but there's just something about him, with his track record winning in the Big 12 conference that, leads me to believe that this just feels like it's going to work out.
Definitely. I think it's going to work out too. I mean, he's done it at every stop he's been at, and now, I mean, he's going to have a chance to resurrect a program that probably has one of the lesser histories in the SEC, but it's still in a good recruiting territory. I mean, I think he's going to be able to kill it in Memphis, which has always been there for Ole Miss, but I don't think they've used the way they need to. Birmingham is a decent, is a decent basketball area right now. Nashville. And I think he's going to do a really good job bringing in players outside too nationally because he's been able to show what he can do. And I think the fact that he was able to take Texas Tech to the national championship that had probably a weaker basketball history than Ole Miss when he arrived there tells me that he can do the same kind of thing at Ole Miss.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's kind of the case study that gives you that optimism that he could really make Ole Miss a serious contender. And then he also was an assistant at Texas Tech before that under Bobby Knight. So you think about his tutelage there.
Absolutely. I mean, yet again, another polarizing figure for kind of similar reasons, actually, except you knew he did it because you saw it. But you can't argue with Bobby Knight's basketball acumen and, of course, all of the great coaches that trained underneath him, including Coach K. That's a Bobby Knight disciple right there. And, I mean, he's the only one that's won a national championship by going undefeated, and nobody's done it since 1972 when he did, or I think it's 1978 when he did it. And, I mean, Bobby Knight's one of the greatest of all time.
Mm-hmm. He is. And, I mean, speaking of great, I mean, the last thing I'll say is I still, when we talk about it, cannot believe Chris Beard's the Ole Miss men's basketball coach.
I can't either, man.
It just seems like impossible to believe.
Oh, it is, man. I mean, like I said, this is the same way I felt when Auburn was able to lock down Bruce Pearl. I kept thinking that something was going to happen at the last minute to where they weren't going to get him. And with Chris Beard, I mean, they kept talking about it for weeks, and I was like, okay, if it hasn't happened yet, that just makes me worried that they're talking about it so much, but it hasn't gotten locked in. And I was so happy when it finally happened because, I mean, this was the coaching hire that was out there, and he's a winner. He's a complete winner, and he's someone that Ole Miss has never had anybody that's even in the same hemisphere of a caliber of coaches on.
Well, I mean, with all the coaches that have retired now, I mean, are there 3 other coaches that you would rather have, like regardless of, the program that you are?
I mean, what you could say John Calipari, Mark Few, Tom Izzo, but when you go past that, I mean, and then I guess you could say Scott Drew over at Baylor, who's really more accomplished right now that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, if Chris Beard did not have, what had happened the last few months, kind of the cloud over him, if he was on the market, like there would be like jobs that opened. Like it would just been insane.
Right. I mean, it would have been name your price. I mean, Kentucky may have looked at him and like told John Calipari to leave the door. I mean, these are the kind of like programs, North Carolina could be so upset they didn't make the NCAA tournament. Here's my hook and a great lead in that they would even tell, their coach to leave the door even after getting the national championship for the chance to get someone like Chris Beard. That's how high level of a hire he is.
Right. Definitely.
Speaking of which, so the three biggest snubs I thought from this year's NCAA tournament, begins with North Carolina. They played a national championship game last year. They won 20 games. And I know that, the ACC was a little bit down, but they had a winning record in the ACC. They were 11-9. And Joe, they're North Carolina. I cannot believe that they left them out of the tournament, especially when you think about they have basically all the players they had from their team last year that made it to the national championship. They still had Leaky Black. I think they and I mean they had all kinds of the same players they had last year, and it was a very weird thing they didn't maintain the same level of success. But still, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a 20-win North Carolina team with a winning record in their conference not make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, it's surprising. It was also surprising to me kind of how their season went too, kind of being like the preseason number one with 4 of the 5 starters returning. Like I thought, this could be a team that could, have some shades of like 06-07 Florida as far as kind of running it back and, having a chance to be right back there and maybe win the whole thing this time. But it just didn't work out. And I heard somebody say that if they had I think they lost to Alabama in double overtime, and how that kind of ultimately, I guess, was the turn the tide as far as them missing the tournament.
Yeah, maybe so. Because I mean, when that game happened, that was what kind of like put Alabama on the map as being, okay, this is an Alabama team you need to watch out for. And they went to the top, and North Carolina went down to the bottom.
Yeah, they just kind of reversed roles.
Yeah, so really disappointing for my cousin Tom and all the Tar Heel fans. But, maybe the positive is, there's a precedent for where Roy Williams had a team like this that barely missed out on the NCAA tournament. They ended up winning the NIT, and the very next year they went and won the national championship.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll be right back.
That's right. And I think that, if you're a North Carolina fan, I don't think you need to be super down on Hubert Davis. I mean, I think he significantly overachieved last year. And granted, he underachieved based on what he had coming back. But if he hadn't overachieved so much, would you really have thought that he underachieved that much this year? I mean, so there's a little bit of relativity to it.
Right. That's true.
And I still think he's a very good coach, and he's someone that needs to be given a lot of time at North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Joe, speaking of very good coaches and someone who I think deserves a real extension is the next one that I have on my list, and that's Jerry Stackhouse at Vanderbilt, which this one shocked me. I mean, I kept seeing that they won in the tournament, but I just didn't understand it. And I thought that eventually they would get put in there because of how great they were. I mean, Vanderbilt finished with a winning record in the SEC, which got, 8 other teams in the tournament, including Mississippi State, who I don't know how you put Mississippi State in over Vanderbilt. Or even, to be honest, I don't see how Missouri warrants entry over Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt also beat Auburn straight up. If you want to, go into this, they had the same record in the league as Auburn, beat Auburn straight up. Oh, and made it further in the SEC tournament and beat Kentucky. I mean, what more was Vanderbilt supposed to do to get in this tournament?
Yeah, it surprised me too, Dan. I kept hearing people concentrate on their inexplicable LSU loss as kind of like a disqualification, but I thought they had enough time at the end to redeem that, with their run in the SEC tournament. But what really surprised me in addition to that, I told you before the show, is their seeding in the NIT. And I know these are 2 mutually exclusive tournaments with different committees for the selection process, but they were like a 3 seed in the NIT. And so that means that they weren't even really even that close. And so that shocked me.
I mean, that's saying that they're, between 8 to 12 spots away from making the NCAA tournament. That's ludicrous.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And Joe, we're going in descending order of the ones that I think are the worst. Number 1, and this one is just like jaw-droppingly bad. How is Clemson excluded from this tournament? So they're 23-10. They have a 14-6 record in the ACC. And Joe, there's a team that made the tournament in NC State, has the same record as Clemson. Clemson beat them 3 times during the regular season. and you put NC State in, but not Clemson in. I mean, if I'm Brad Brownell and I'm a Clemson fan right now, I'm livid.
Yeah, that really is senseless when I think about it. I did not know that stat, and yeah, that shocked me. I think NC State. I think they won at least a game in the ACC tournament, but to me, I thought Clemson had a much better showing in the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, there was times when Clemson, I think, was leading the ACC overall. I mean, I think it was about half the season they were the number one team in the ACC. So to me, that's a snub that's the level of Texas A&M last year in my mind.
Yeah, that was definitely one that stood out. Rutgers surprised me that they didn't make it too because they were ranked for a lot this season, and so I thought they had a good chance to make it too.
Yeah, and they've made it the last couple years, and I think the last 2 years they've won at least one game in the NCAA tournament. And a lot of people talk about how Steve Peichel is like one of these really gritty go-getter lower level coaches that everybody seems to like. So they kind of like the story of it. Plus, people like our show make fun of Rutgers sports so much that they always can seem to want to kind of, prop them up and say that why they should be in the Big Ten and be considered relevant. So I kind of expected Rutgers to make it too.
Right. And, the last thing I'll say is the thin line of separation between a lot of these teams. You look at Arizona State, which is one of the last, I think, 4 teams to make it. Really, the only reason they made it is they made a half-court shot to beat Arizona a few weeks ago.
Yeah, that's definitely the big fact right there that got them in was getting the win over Arizona.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
But, in my mind, beating a red-hot Kentucky team, if you're Vanderbilt in the SEC tournament and having beaten them during the regular season is more impressive than a lucky shot to beat Arizona.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I saw Vanderbilt beat Kentucky, I thought they were a shoo-in. I thought there was even an argument if they had not beaten Kentucky. But when I saw that, I thought it was just, a done deal.
Absolutely. And speaking of Mississippi State as a team that I don't think how you can justify them being in over Vanderbilt, they played last night and had a really tough loss in a real exciting game against Pittsburgh, which I kind of thought in watching the end of it was one where whichever team won it is one that maybe is primed to make a little bit of a run in the NCAA tournament. Because I feel like you always see a team that's in the first 4 that wins the first game in an exciting fashion that goes on a big run. Sometimes it's all the way to the Final Four. UCLA, the first year that they had Tyger Campbell and Jaime Jaquez, they were one like that. And of course, if it hadn't been for the amazing bank shot by Gonzaga, they would have gone to the national championship game to take on Baylor. They're one that did it. I think Wichita State and VCU are both also ones that were in the first 4 that ended up making it all the way to the Final Four. And so I'm not saying Pitt's going to make the Final Four, but I see with the way that game ended last night, Pittsburgh could be one to watch out to maybe win a game or 2 in the NCAA tournament.
Oh, I certainly think so, Dan. Yeah, I remember it all started out, I think, in 2011 with Shaka Smart and VCU going from the first 4 to the Final Four. And just every year since, it's like there's been a lot of teams that have either made a deep run out of the first 4 or have at least won one game. And we saw Pittsburgh with Jeff Capel, who's been one of my favorite coaches for a long time in college basketball. He used to be the head coach, of course, at Oklahoma, assistant at Duke. And I was glad to see him get a win. State played great as well, right there at the wire. I think there were 21 or 22 lead changes throughout the game. So it was that kind of, close game. I think the most lead changes in about 5 years for an NCAA tournament game. An interesting note, we were talking about Ole Miss basketball earlier. They've got, it seems like, several players that either played for Kermit Davis or played for the program earlier who were playing in the NCAA tournament for other teams. You got Jarkel Jr. at NC State, and you got Blake Henson at Pittsburgh. And so he was on that team last night. And at the end of the game, Mississippi State had a wide open 3-pointer with a couple seconds to go. They missed that. And then they missed the putback as well. Pittsburgh's able to survive.
Yep, and with the exception of finally breaking through in baseball, that's just Mississippi State sports for you right there.
It's been tough.
It's been tough. That was a tough one. All right, Joe, let's go through the regionals a little bit, and we'll start up in the Midwest region. And this is one where Houston's the number 1 seed in it. And one where, of course, you got a lot of ire from the head coach at Houston about the fact that they have to play in Birmingham for their first 2 games, and there's a huge possibility that they may have to take on Auburn in the second round, which, of course, I'm hoping that gets to happen because That would mean that Auburn won their first game against an Iowa team that has a lot of high scoring capability, much more so than the rest of the Big Ten, which tends to be on the rock throwing side of things when it comes to shooting the basketball. Joe, first off, before we look into this Auburn Iowa game, how good do you think Houston is if Marcus Sasser is not available?
I think they're very vulnerable. I think even with him, there's a vulnerability to their team because they have one NBA forward who may be a top 5 pick next year, but I still look at their front court for the large part, they're more undersized. I always get nervous about teams in the tournament that don't have like that 7-footer, 6'10" guy. I think their tallest rebounders like in the 6'7" range. And that makes me nervous when you see a team that's more guard oriented because I feel like there's a good chance that they could have a cold shooting night and then they end up getting eliminated, in a one do or die setting. And you take Sasser out of the equation, they're even more vulnerable because we saw how Memphis had their way against them in the AAC championship game on Sunday. And so I think that of the number 1 seeds, they're absolutely the one that could be the victim first.
I think so too, Joe. I think especially if they have to take on Auburn in the second round, them having to play essentially an away game in the second round is not good when you have a little bit of limitations when it comes to scoring. And I think that, if Auburn can get that win over Iowa, they're going to have a really lit crowd that's probably going to be like a 90-10 type atmosphere there. And I think it's going to be a huge opportunity if Auburn can get that first win against what appears to be a vulnerable Houston team right now.
Right. And maybe Sasser plays, but coming off that groin injury, I just don't know how effective he'll be. And so that's a big question. I know a lot of people tend to think that they're still going to make a deep run, but, I'm interested to see how it goes. And it is fascinating to me, hypothetically, the committee's got it conveniently set up where if Houston were to make it to the Elite Eight, they could take on Texas.
Right, exactly. And Joe, in the crazy pipe dream that of course, a lot of Auburn fans have, they also have it set up to where you could have an Auburn-Alabama national championship game if they were all but to win out the entire way.
You're right. You also could have Indiana-Purdue.
That's true. You do have it set up that way. You could also have Arizona and UCLA.
Yep, exactly.
So there's definitely a lot of opportunities right there. Joe, moving down, I think, the Drake and Indiana one is an interesting 12-5, or Drake and Miami is a very interesting 12-5 game. Drake is a school that's got a decent amount of basketball history to it. Miami's a team that, as a 10 seed last year had a great run. They beat, an Auburn team that was, favorite from a lot of people to win the national championship with Walker Kessler and Jabari Smith. And, they did it with J.D. Wong, who came back, and he's with this Miami team. But they didn't really succeed the way that you expected Larinaga's bunch to this year. I think a lot of people thought they had a chance to be like maybe a 2-3 seed, something like that. They're coming in off a weak ACC that we saw they don't respect in the committee because they didn't even put North Carolina or Clemson in. I think it's been a little bit of a down year for Miami. Do you see this as a possible upset spot?
I do, Dan. I picked Drake to win this game. I think that Miami is also kind of coming in with some injuries, some key players. And so I think they're a little bit hobbled, and I think that Drake's going to be able to capitalize.
Okay. I still have Miami winning that one, but this is one that I'm like flip-flopping on. I haven't really like finalized my picks yet. When I got to the very end of my bracket, I was very dissatisfied with it. So I'm going to look at it a couple more times. Joe, Indiana taking on Kent State. I like Indiana to win this game. And I kind of think that, now that you have, Woodson, of course, the former Cavs coach, being Indiana's coach, he's kind of improved them the last couple of years. You have Trace Jackson Davis, who I think is a 5th-year senior. I think Indiana's a team that could make a really big run in this. And initially, I have them going to the Final Four. So,
oh no, I have them. I'll tell you later on where I have them. But yeah, I think that they're just an outstanding team. I think that Trace Jackson Davis, with like his size, with his scoring and rebounding ability, he averages 20 points and like 10 rebounds a game. I mean, this guy is a force of nature, and I think that this may be his NCAA tournament for the taking.
I think so, too. I mean, when you have a guard that's a 5th-year senior that's an excellent player, I tend to like you. I mean, you look at what UConn's been able to do a couple times. I mean, including that time they had that great run through the Big East championship and came out and won, with having the excellent guard play. I mean, it just makes a big difference when you have that senior leadership.
Yes, absolutely.
And Joe, we were talking about Pitt. I see them. They of course, I got them winning their first round matchup against Iowa State, who we're talking about the kind of crazy love that the Big 12 has gotten versus the ACC. I mean, Iowa State's sitting there at 19-13. You had North Carolina at 2013, didn't make the tournament. Vanderbilt with 22 wins didn't make the tournament. Clemson with 23 wins didn't make the tournament. And yet somehow Iowa State at 19-13 is the 6th seed. I think Iowa State's an extremely overrated team, and Pitt takes them out in the first round.
Yeah, I think so too. I've also got Pitt. I thought that was a vast, seeding travesty, and it kind of reminded me of Texas A&M. Kind of the flip side. I think they're vastly underseeded.
Yeah, I think Texas A&M might be the most underseeded team in this tournament. I mean, they were by and far the second best team in the SEC. And they showed it by, beating Alabama and then making it to the SEC championship game. And yet they're sitting here as a 7 seed. I think a lot of it is that Buzz Williams has been so outspoken and hating on the NCAA tournament selection committee from last year, and put it out there that, he was criticizing them again before they even got picked. They were like, oh, you want to criticize us? We'll screw you again. Don't worry about it. I'm pretty sure that's what happened, because that's the only explanation for them being a 7 seed. I mean, they're good enough in my mind to be a 3 or a 4 seed.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it doesn't make any sense. It's like the only other explanation is they wanted to set it up that they could face Texas in the round of 32.
Yeah, I think that's possible, and I do have that matchup happening in the round of 32. And Joe, we were talking about how great this Texas team has been without Chris Beard. I think that that's a prime opportunity for an upset of Texas A&M making the Sweet 16 at least by beating Texas, because Texas A&M has shown the ability. They beat Alabama pretty handily. They can beat some of these teams that have really elite scorers. They're not scared of anybody. And Buzz Williams' style of defense is such a tough thing to prepare for that if you don't play it all the time, they can easily get you in a tournament setting.
No, I could see it. I went back and forth with that. I did have Texas making it to the Sweet 16, but that was definitely a coin flip game for me against A&M if it happens.
All right, Joe, moving down to the West Regional, you got Kansas, of course, the number 1 seed. But this 8-9 matchup with Arkansas and Illinois is maybe the most fascinating 8-9 game on the board to me.
Yeah, it's really good, Dan. I went Arkansas here, but I also went back and forth. I feel like Illinois the last couple of years kind of underachieved in the tournament. Arkansas, made a lot of noise with back-to-back Elite 8 matchups. And I kind of just lean towards Eric Musselman's team. I think being more talented. I think about this team being a preseason top 3 team, and I think they'll figure it out enough to at least get to the next round.
Yeah, Arkansas's been playing a little bit better of late too. They were able to beat Auburn in a close game in the SEC tournament. They finished the season a little stronger. They had a really rough time in the SEC and through a lot of it. But they're definitely a team that on paper and on the court looks like a team that's good enough to be in the Final Four. I did go Illinois on this one because I really like Brad Underwood as a coach. And I do feel like he's had teams the last couple of years that were better in what they did during the season, but that underachieved. I think there's going to be a lot of motivation for Illinois to be a good team. And I also think that, Illinois and Kansas, I think that's a very vulnerable place for maybe a 1 seed to go down. And I think it could be the same with Arkansas, too. I think this Kansas team is very overrated.
I mean, it could be a tough game. I could see that really being, a physical game, and, we'll see if Kansas can survive it.
Absolutely, because, I feel like with Bill Self, he'll have his team that'll win a national championship, but then he always follows it up with having a stinker and, kind of going out early in the NCAA tournament.
And, he's got a lot of new players that are either in key roles that maybe weren't on the team last year, like a Grady Dick or a guy like Jalen Wilson, who's, I think, the Big 12 Player of the Year. But last year, he played more of a supporting role. And this year, he's the guy. And so I kind of want to see how these guys perform on that stage being the main person.
Plus, Joe, you also got to think, too, that Bill Self missed a lot of the Big 12 tournament with an illness. There's a little bit of a lack of cohesiveness maybe with the team, too.
that could be a factor.
Joe, here's an interesting 5-12 matchup in St. Mary's and VCU, two mid-majors that both have a really good history in this tournament. And St. Mary's is one that, was winning the West Coast Conference for a long time this year and made the championship game and got waxed by Gonzaga, but they actually do have a win over Gonzaga this year. Who do you like in that one?
I like VCU, just the way they ended their season winning the Atlantic 10. I thought they were very impressive in that championship game. But just kind of an overall critique I wanted to say about this region. I'm very frustrated with what the committee did, putting both St. Mary's and Gonzaga in the same region. St. Mary's had one of their best seasons ever in school history. And, I'm kind of a fan of the West Coast Conference. It's a conference I keep up with and really enjoy watching. And I just think it's a travesty that you don't have these teams in different regions with Gonzaga and St. Mary's.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen, the possibility that they could have played each other in the national championship game. That would have been really cool for me.
Yeah, I feel like if it had been a power conference, with only two teams, you would have absolutely separated it.
Especially two teams like this that have such a rivalry where, it's probably been the last 10 years they've been the number 1 and number 2 team in the West Coast Conference. And they split their series this year. And, so I think that this is probably the year that St. Mary's has been closest to being as good as Gonzaga. So it would have been nice to have seen them to have that opportunity maybe later in the tournament.
Right, exactly.
Joe, fascinating matchup for me, UConn and Iona. Of course, Iona, coached by Rick Pitino. He was another one that was rumored for the Ole Miss job. Rick Pitino, it seems like he's very happy at Iona now, being out of the spotlight, but keeps getting this team a little bit closer. I mean, they came in last year. They played Alabama, played them pretty good, I think, for the first half in the NCAA tournament. And now they're all the way up to a 13 seed. I mean, he's starting to get a little bit more credos to him. UConn is a team that a lot of people think could, possibly win a national championship. They beat Alabama early in the season. There was a time they were number 1 overall. Do you think this is a possible huge shocking upset right here?
No, I think it's an interesting game kind of by storyline with it, being UConn against Iona, with Iona being in the state of New York and the rumor mill that Rick Pitino is going to take the job at St. John's in a few weeks. And so I think there's going to be a lot of buildup with him against UConn, but I think UConn's going to win pretty easily. And, I'll go ahead and say it. I actually have UConn in my Final Four. I think they're that good. And I think that with my bracket this year, I'm trying to be a little bit bolder because I feel like every year I sometimes make a lot of the safe picks, but you look at brackets every year, there's always, kind of those weird formulas that play out. So that's one of mine this year is UConn making it to the Final Four. I also wanted to mention I have Indiana in the Final Four as well.
I do also. Indiana's a Final Four team for me also. I got UConn making a deep run, but I got them going down to UCLA in the Elite Eight. I'm a big fan of UCLA. We'll talk about them in a little bit, but I love the senior leadership they have of Jaime Jaquez and Tyre Campbell.
Yeah, they're good.
Yeah, I got UConn beating St. Mary's and making it to the Elite Eight. Joe, here's one that's going to be interesting. TCU and Arizona State.
I like TCU. Jamie Dixon's one of my favorite coaches. Loved him when he was at Pittsburgh, and I think that he's going to advance and take on Gonzaga in the next round.
That's right. TCU's had a good year this year in basketball. I mean, they've been consistently top 25 in a really good conference in the Big 12. Had some really big wins at home. That looked like a really nice home facility that TCU has at basketball. Now, I love the court, and the atmosphere is good. And Jamie Dixon did a great job at Pittsburgh for a long time. I thought that was a great hire for TCU.
Absolutely.
Joe, we got Gonzaga. I think they're going to be good in their first round. I think Gonzaga TCU is going to be a really good round of 32 game, but I got Gonzaga making it to Sweet 16.
Yeah, I've got them making it to the Elite Eight and then falling to UConn. But we'll talk about UCLA in a second. I think that could be a great game.
Oh yeah, definitely, Joe. Going to the bottom of this bracket, good because but we'll do the next half in the separate podcast. But Northwestern and Boise State, I think Northwestern's been a great story this year. I like them to get a win in the NCAA tournament. I think that, they'll get the first win that they've had. I think it's been 20 years since they've won a game in the NCAA tournament, but they're definitely one that, really exceeded this year. I think they'll get one win. But in the second round, I don't see them beating UCLA, who I'll be honest, I've been winning the national championship. I'm a huge fan of UCLA. I think that they've built so slowly, and with all of the leadership that they have, I think this is their year.
It could be. I mean, they have two great players in Campbell and Jaquez that have been there for a while. I really think that Gonzaga UCLA game. I picked UConn in this region, but it wouldn't surprise me if either one of those teams won the whole thing. We think about Gonzaga's kind of out of the storylines this week. They still got Drew Timme, and then UCLA. I feel like a lot of people kind of detracted from them because they had one or two key injuries, but they still have Jaquez and Campbell.
Absolutely. And it's a repeat of that great Final Four matchup we had a couple years. And when we come back on the other side, we're going to talk about the South and the East regionals. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.